Welcome to the course on church history. I'm Dr. Stephen Myers. I'm with the Institute for Biblical and Scientific Studies. And you get a lot more courses, information, charts we use at www.bibleandscience.com. In the background, you can see the great Church of Sophia in Istanbul. In this church history course, we want an overview of church history starting at the very beginning, the birth of the church in Acts chapter 2, and then going all the way up to the present time. We won't spend much time on the book of Acts because that's also covered in the session on Here is a good overview of church history. They all start with P's to help you remember. First, we have Pentecost, when we have the birth of the church, the Apostolic Age. Then we have persecution, around 64 to 313 A.D. Then we have the political union of church and state, starting with Constantine. Then we have the Pope's power and prosperity. Then we have the Protestant Reformation, 1517 A.D. And then we have Pietism and revivals from the 16th to 20th century. And then lastly we have postmodernism in the 21st century. So we want a quick overview of church history. The Apostolic Age, the Book of Acts, from 33 to 64 AD. The key verse for the Book of Acts is chapter 1, verse 8. It tells us to go into Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth with the gospel. And so this is a good outline for the book of Acts. You have Judea, Acts chapter 1 through 7. We have the birth of the church in Acts chapter 2. We have Stephen being stoned in Acts chapter 7. And from this stoning, it scatters the church into Samaria, and then we have Paul's missionary journeys going into the uttermost parts of the earth. Acts 13 through 28. Here we have a nice chart of the overview of church history in the book of Acts in the New Testament. First of all, we have the life of Christ in the Gospels. Then we have church history in the book of Acts. And during this time, there's a number of epistles or letters that are written. There are the Pauline epistles written by Paul, and then there are the general epistles written by others like Peter, Jude, James, and John. Now here, the book of Acts, we have the beginning of the church in Jerusalem. And then we have Paul's missionary journeys. And during these journeys, he wrote these different books. We have the prison epistles while he was in prison in Rome, in Ephesians, Colossians, Philemon, and Philippians. We have the pastoral epistles, which we believe Paul was freed from jail, and he wrote to Timothy and Titus. Then we have the book of Revelation. A key event in church history is the beginning of the persecution of Christians in 64 A.D. This is the first imperial persecution. Nero blames the Christians for the burning of Rome in 64 A.D. And Christians are used as torches to light Nero's garden. It's believed that Nero needed more room, so he had part of Rome burnt, and he blamed it on the Christians. Famous saying, the blood of the martyrs was the seed of the church. Christians were forced to live in the catacombs of Rome. And finally, Paul was beheaded in Rome about 67, 68 A.D. Another key, very important, was the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 A.D. by Titus. This caused the scattering of the Jews and Christians around the world. And the result of this, Christianity is spread throughout the Roman Empire. There was the first Jewish revolt, and resulted in Vespasian coming, and then he had to go back to Rome to become emperor, and Titus was left to destroy Jerusalem. A key event. A key writer, person at this time, was Josephus. He was a Jewish historian born about 37 A.D. During the first Jewish revolt, which was from 66 to 70 A.D., he was captured and taken to Rome, where he wrote the Jewish Wars about the first Jewish revolt, the antiquity of the Jews from the creation to the fall at Masada, and against Ephraim, who defended Jews against pagan slander. He gives valuable information about the New Testament and early church background. We have the Apostolic Fathers in the book of Acts in the New Testament. Then we have the next generation, the early church fathers, who many were maybe disciples or of the apostles or disciples of the disciples. The key early church fathers were Ignatius, who was the bishop of Antioch in Syria, Polycarp, the bishop at Smyrna, Irenaeus, Tertullian, Justin Martyr, Clement of Rome, Origen, and Eusebius. All these wrote and were key church fathers in the early church. A key discovery was the Nag Hermody Library, or Gnostic Gospels. They were discovered in 1945 near the town of Nag Hermody in Upper Egypt. There were 12 leather-bound papyrus codices sealed in a jar. The most famous of these is the Gospel of Thomas, containing 114 sayings of Jesus. They are now housed in the Coptic Museum in Cairo, Egypt. And these tell us a lot more about Gnosticism and what they believed. These Nag Hermody texts. The last persecution was under Diocletian, and it was the worst. And that was in around 303 A.D. We now come to the third part in church history. First, we have Pentecost, the birth of the church in the apostolic age. Second, we have the time of persecution of Christians. And now we come to the third, the political union of church and state. This is roughly 313 to 476 A.D. Constantine's victory over Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge resulted in his conversion to Christianity in 312 A.D. It was said that Constantine saw this vision of a cross in the sky, which some think was a meteorite. And he said, "By this sign we shall conquer." And so they painted crosses on all their shields and went out into battle and won the battle. Constantine issues the Edict of Milan in 313 A.D., which stopped the persecution of the Christians. Constantine the Great becomes the head of the church. And here is a coin with a picture of him on it. So we have the political union of the church and state with Constantine. In 323 A.D., Constantine becomes the sole emperor, and he moves the capital from Rome to Constantinople, which is now modern-day Istanbul. Here is a summary of the key church councils. We have the very first Council of Nicaea in 325 A.D. They gave us the Apostles' Creed, or the Nicene Creed. Then we have the Council of Constantinople in 381 A.D., which called the question of Christ's deity. Athanasius versus Arius. Is Jesus God, or is he just a man? Then we have the Council of Chalcedon in 451, that Jesus is indeed perfect God, yet a perfect man. Then we have a summary of all these earlier councils, help to clarify who was Jesus, Christology. The conclusion that these councils reached was Jesus was fully human, yet fully divine, or God, the second person of the Holy Trinity. Another very important great leader of the church was Saint Augustine of Hippo, lived from 354 to 430 A.D. He wrote Confessions and The City of God. These were one of his two key works, plus he wrote many other works. He was a great theologian and formed the doctrine of the church. Another key leader was Jerome, 345 to 430 A.D. And what he did was he translated the Old and New Testament into Latin, called the Vulgate. He was famous for translating this Vulgate, a Latin translation of the Bible, which is the official Bible of the Roman Catholic Church. Now we want to review here. We have church history. We have the beginning at Pentecost. We have the Apostolic Fathers. Then we have a great persecution of the church, the early church fathers. Then we come to the end of persecution with Constantine, political union of church and state. And then our fourth division here, we have the rise of the Pope's power and prosperity from 476 to 1517 AD. The Pope's rise to power fills the vacuum of the fall of Rome in 476 AD. Kings must get their approval from the Pope. This begins with Pope Gregory the Great. that authorized torture by inquisitioners. Many inquisitioners were Dominic monks. The most famous Inquisition was the Spanish Inquisition. The same king and queen that sent Columbus to the New World, Ferdinand II and Isabel I, carried out the Spanish Inquisition, which was not under papal control as earlier ones, but under direct control of the monarch. Because of persecution, many Jews converted. Ferdinand II started the Inquisition to stop false conversion by Jews to Christianity. Later it was used to stop the spread of Protestants. Lists of indexes were produced listing prohibited books, especially any Bible translations into the vernacular. The Crusades, another low point in church history. There were 9 major crusades to take back the Holy Land. The first crusade was in 1095 to 1099. There was the siege of Jerusalem. There was a crusade also of 1101. The second crusade, 1147 to 1149. The third crusade, 1187 to 1192. The fourth crusade, 1202 to 1204. The Albigensian crusade. The Children's crusade. Then we have the fifth crusade, 1217 to 1221. The sixth crusade, 1228 to 1229. The seventh crusade, 1248 to 1254. The eighth crusade, 1270. And ninth crusade, 1271 to 1272. The first crusade was from 1095 to 1099. In March of 1095, at the Council of Piacenza, ambassadors sent by the Byzantine Emperor Alexandros I called for help with defending his empire against the Turks. Later that year, in the Council of Clermont, Pope Urban II called upon all Christians to join a war against the Turks, promising those who died in the endeavor would receive immediate remissions of their sins. Sigurd I of Norway was the first European king who went on a crusade, and crusader armies managed to defeat 2 substantial Turkish forces at the Dorlisimum and at Antioch. The siege of Antioch took place shortly before the siege of Jerusalem during the First Crusade. Antioch fell to the Franks in May 1098, but not before a lengthy siege. Once inside the city, as was standard military practice of the time, the Franks then massacred the civilians, destroying mosques and pillaged the city. The siege on Jerusalem, the Jews and Muslims fought together to defend Jerusalem against the invading Franks. They were unsuccessful, though, and on July 15th, 1099, the Crusaders entered the city. Again, they proceeded to massacre the remaining Jews and Muslim civilians and pillaged and destroyed mosques and the city itself. After gaining control of Jerusalem, the Crusaders created 4 Crusader states: the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the country of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, and the country of Tripoli. At the same time, we had the rise of universities. Modern Western universities had their origins in the medieval church. They began as cathedral schools and eventually became partially separated from the cathedrals and then formed their own institutions. The earliest being the University of Paris in 1150 and the University of Oxford in 1096. Anselm, from 1033 to 1109, was the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was a great philosopher and theologian. He wrote Cur Deus Homo, Why God Became Man. He was the first to put forth the ontological argument that because we conceive of a perfect God, God therefore must exist. Thomas Aquinas lived from 1225 to 1274 AD. He was the greatest scholastic theologian of the Middle Ages. His most famous book is Summa Theologica. In 1270, the Bishop of Paris, and later became the Bishop of Oxford, condemned his teaching, which used reason, which went against Augustine. 50 years later, he was made a saint. The Papal Schism was a long period of crisis from 1378 to 1416, where there were two or more who claimed to be the Pope of Rome. The conflict was mainly political rather than doctrinal. In 1309, Pope Clement V moved the papacy to Avignon in southern France. Later there were two popes. One claimed to be the rightful one at Avignon, and the other in Rome. For almost 40 years there were two popes and two sets of cardinals. In 1417, the Council in Constance declared all other popes void and elected Pope Martin V. This ended the schism. Godfrey Chaucer, from 1340 to 1400, Chaucer wrote the famous Canterbury Tales. We now come to the Renaissance. The Renaissance, 1399 to 1599, was a period of great cultural change and achievement. Famous artists Michelangelo, Raphael, Donatello, and Da Vinci. This is the time when St. Peter's Basilica was built. One important man was Erasmus of Rotterdam, 1467 to 1536. There was a renewed interest in classical studies. The study of Greek and Hebrew led to the study of the Bible in the original languages, paving the way for the Reformation. Erasmus of Rotterdam in Holland, one of the greatest humanists, prepared the first edition of the Greek New Testament, which was printed in 1516 at Basel. He wrote best-selling satires, the Colloquies, and Praise of Folly. The Renaissance renewed interest in the classical studies of the New Testament written in original Greek. Erasmus prepared the Greek edition of the New Testament, which is the basis for the Textus Receptus. The invention of the printing press in 1455 was made by Gutenberg. The first book printed was the Bible. The printing press was the key to the spread of the Reformation. We want to look at the pre-Reformation leaders. There was Peter Waldo and his followers, the Waldensians, in 1175. We have William of Occam in 1290 to 1349 AD. He called for reform in the Roman Catholic Church. He rejected papal authority. He was a skilled writer. Today we still use the principle named after him, Occam's razor, which is the simplest explanation, is usually the best explanation. Then we have John Wycliffe, born in England in 1324. He translated the Latin Bible into English in 1388. He opposed the Pope in paying taxes and in doctrine. He is called the morning star of the Reformation. Then we have John Huss, followed much of John Wycliffe. And at the Council of Constance, he was condemned and then he was burned at the stake in 1415. Peter of Prague was also burned at the stake. Savonarola, 1452 to 98, was an Italian preacher of reform who denounced the Pope, was excommunicated, and then executed. We want to now look at an overview of all the church history we've covered so far. You can get copies of these charts on our website, BibleandScience.com. We want to review now. We have the beginning of the church at Pentecost. We have the Apostolic Age. We have the persecution of the early Christians. Then we have the political union. That was in 313 A.D. with Constantine making it legal for Christians to practice their religion, and united the church with the state. We then have the rise of the popes and their power. We have a great schism between the Eastern Church and the Western Church. The Western Church would be the Roman Catholic Church. The Eastern, we have the Orthodox Church. We have Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, and Eastern Orthodox. We have another great schism in the West with the Protestant Reformation by Martin Luther in 1517, nailing the 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Church. Martin Luther founded the Lutherans. The Moravians split off of the Lutherans with Count Zinzendorf. Some other great leaders of the Protestant Reformation was Zwingli. From Zwingli came the Anabaptist movement. From also the Mennonites. Another great leader, John Calvin, who founded the Reformation Church, the Reformed Church. Then we have another great leader, John Knox in Scotland, founding the Presbyterian Church. Then we see another split with Henry VIII not getting an annulment, so he splits from the Roman Catholic Church, with Cranmer leading the way. And under the Church of England here, we have two main groups, the Puritans who wanted to purify the Church of England. We have the Separatists who wanted to separate from the Church of England, and they did, and became pilgrims that came to America. And from these separatists, there was several groups that formed. We have the Congregational Church. Mainly think of the Pilgrims. We have the Baptists with Roger Williams in Rhode Island. And we have split-offs from the Baptists. We have the Church of Christ. We have William Miller, who claimed Christ was coming back in 1845. We have the Seventh-day Adventists who split from that. Then we have another group of Methodists, John Wesley founding the Methodists, and a split off from the Methodists is the great Pentecostal movement. The Roman Catholics have several orders. We have the Francis of Assisi, the Dominicans, and the Jesuits. Then we have a whole trying to get them all back together again, the World Council of Churches. So this gives you a whole overview of church history and where some of the different denominations have come from. We now have some questions we want to review. The birth of the church occurred during what? Was it Christmas, Pentecost, Easter, Passover? The answer is Pentecost. That's when the church started in Acts chapter 2. Okay, here's another question to put in order the events in church history. Number one, we have the last persecution of Diocletian. That was in 303 AD. We have Saul's conversion. That will be number one. We have the destruction of Jerusalem. That was in 70 AD. We have 1st, 2nd Corinthians, Romans was written. That would be during his missionary journeys. Then we have Constantine was converted and took over the empire. That was in 312 AD. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians was written before 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Then we have the prison epistles. And then we have Nero blamed Christians for the burning of Rome. This was in 64 AD. Who was not among those of the early church fathers? We have Tertullian, one of the great leaders. We have Origen, great theologian. Damascene II, that's just a made-up name. And we have Justin Martyr. Who is this a picture of? Is it Nero, Augustine, Constantine, or Diocletian? Actually, this is a coin of Diocletian, who persecuted the great persecution in 303 AD. Another true-false. The early councils helped to clarify who Jesus was. This is true. They wanted to establish who was he just human? Was he God, part human, part God? And they came to the conclusion he's perfectly human and perfectly God. We want to complete the following sentence, fill in the blank. The Pope's rise to power to fill the vacuum of the fall of what? It was the fall of Rome in 476 AD. Because of the political power falling, the Pope was able to fill in the vacuum. Who was the prophet who contributed to the rise of Islam? That would be Muhammad. A short answer. Who did the Holy Roman Empire rise under? That would be Charlemagne or Charles the Great. How many crusades were there? 9, according to this course. Some people may put less, some may add more. Congratulations, you have finally completed the Church History Learning Module. I'm Dr. Stephen C. Myers. I'm with the Institute for Biblical and Scientific Studies, and you get more information, some of the charts and information you can get at www.bibleandscience.com. And thank you very much for taking the course.